The Liberty Weekly podcast is brought to you by Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. Sick of losing arguments with your statist friends? Fear no more. Now you can vanquish your intellectual foes with courses taught by top libertarian professors. Tool your intellectual arsenal and enroll today by navigating to www.libertyweekly.net/Liberty Classroom or by following the link in the show notes page.
You know, the last thing we need is a new version of politics. I mean, of all the things we need in this country and don't need, it's not more politics. It's become increasingly clear, I think, that there's the serious structural problems we have in this country with respect to, all created by the federal government, by the way, but with regard to spending and debt and entitlements and war, foreign policy, monetary policy, cannot and will not be solved by politics. There's no political will in Washington to do so, to deal with the entitlement train wreck, to deal with these intractable wars, this reckless monetary policy. So, in fact, I mean, these things aren't even much talked about by politicians, including those running for office over the last year. So, while we're arguing about diversions, transgender bathrooms, ordinary people, I hope, are beginning to understand and recognize the limits of politics. In other words, they're waking up to the reality that politics doesn't work. It doesn't produce anything like the results it promises. It oftentimes produces the opposite. It enriches this undeserving class of people who've installed themselves apparently permanently in and around the political apparatus. And most of all, people are waking up to the myth of democratic consensus, that some cobbled together majority of voters doesn't carry any moral or legal legitimacy. We can't vote, tax, spend, borrow, and we can't legislate our way out of these problems. So that's really our theme for today, that the ends, or at least the limits of politics, is a method for keeping peace, resolving disputes, and really organizing society.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McFarland, appearing as always with the co-host, Jerry McCullum.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, so today we are going to have a little variety hour in the political theater and see what's being paraded in front of us this week. And so we have three topics lined up that have been in the news, some pretty hot ticket items. One is the Russian sanctions that the House and the Senate both overwhelmingly voted in favor for. That's got us in a little hot water with the EU. Also, it's terrible. The second topic is Obamacare and the skinny repeal, in quotes, that failed on Thursday night. And our third topic is Calexit and some new developments that we came across in the last few days. But before we get into those topics, we do have some housekeeping announcements that we're going to move. Usually we do housekeeping stuff at the end of the episode, but this time we're going to move it up to the beginning. The first is that in a better effort to communicate with you guys, the audience, we have installed a SpeakPipe application on our website at libertyweekly.net where you can easily leave us voicemail that we can actually patch into the show. And it'll be a real good way for you guys to bring up questions, interact with us, or give us a shout out. And we'll be sure to integrate them into the show. Our second announcement is that the other day on the 24th actually, we had a very, very high download volume. And we were it seemed a little too good to be true. So we figured that the FBI finally had given us the downloads that we requested in an earlier episode that I'll link in the show notes page.
But if you're not the FBI listening and you happen to have found us on the 24th, please let us know because we're really curious to hear where all of you came from.
Yeah, definitely be sure to do that. Our third announcement is that we're working on a new ebook that will be available for our email list subscribers. And it will roughly, we are kind of still in the development stage, but roughly it'll be talking about ways that we can find freedom in our own lives. And our fourth bulletin, a little tangentially related to the SpeakPipe application and our download day. We've been having a lot of really great listener interaction. Actually, a lot of Twitter interaction. People have reached out to us on Facebook. I had a good conversation with a guy named Brian that reached out to us, so we want to give a shout out to him. and the rest of you out there that have been communicating with us on social media. We really appreciate it, and it's really good to know what you guys are interested in, what you like about the show, and ways that we can improve it. Another announcement that we have are upcoming guest spots that we have arranged. Actually, tonight we're going to be recording an episode with the Actual Anarchy podcast talking about Rogue One, which I think will be aired on August 6th, because they usually put out episodes on Sunday. And so keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll be a really good one. We're excited to go on their show and talk about Rogue One. And without further ado, let's dive into our subject matter today. So at this point, we probably all know that John McCain killed the Obamacare repeal. There's been a lot of hate for John McCain in the last few days. We are not fans of John McCain.
Not at all.
Although I don't know if I would necessarily agree, because a lot of people, especially I think Liberty Hangout was talking about how they detest John McCain and how he ruined everything. But I think that maybe this would be a good, because if the Republicans are going to repeal Obamacare, they have to take it all off the books and replace it with nothing, or replace it with a free market alternative. And my proposition is that if they did succeed in pulling off a skinny repeal, in quotes, the fundamental axioms behind what makes Obamacare, i.e. not letting insurance providers discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, if you don't get rid of that, you're not getting rid of Obamacare.
And there's a risk that if a skinny repeal did go through, that whatever it would be called, I don't know if it'd be called Trump Care or something like that, whatever this new form of Obamacare would now be owned by the Republicans and would theoretically be on the free market, non-regulatory side of the table. And it would be perceived by the public, even though we know that it really isn't the case. And we may have a situation like we did in 2008, where regulation had not gone down, that we weren't in a situation where deregulation caused the financial crisis in 2008. It was much the opposite, but modern narrative is that deregulation caused that. And if we have something like the skinny repeal, then we may find the atrocities of Obamacare being blamed on Obamacare Light.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that the Democratic narrative going forward is already, I've heard whispers of this, but I think the narrative going forward is going to be, yeah, Obamacare failed because the Republicans were causing so much uncertainty because they were trying really hard to repeal it. So it didn't work because they were, messing with it. So they're still going to try and weasel it.
The glorious Democracy's Party's plan of Obamacare was tainted and destroyed by the Republicans, and that made it horrible.
Yes.
Not because its foundational principles are terrible.
And I mean, that's the name of the game in the political theater. So I'm purposely employing that term because Lou Rockwell's blog, he's famous for having the political theater where he does his editorials. But I mean, it really is a theater. All of it's for show. We all know that the left and the right are on the same team. They just disagree in tactic, and they do it to keep us amused. So the skinny repeal was set out to repeal the individual mandate, which is ridiculous, because if you repeal the individual mandate, but you don't repeal the ability of insurers to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, then no one's going to buy the insurance. They're just going to wait until they are sick. And then, because insurance providers could not discriminate based on pre-existing condition, they will buy the insurance at a discounted price that's held down, and they'll save a whole bunch of money in the meantime. They knew Obamacare wasn't going to work. They knew that you can't make healthy people buy insurance or buy into the program. So they had to institute the monetary penalty for not purchasing insurance so that more healthy people would buy insurance that they didn't need, so that old people who had more health issues could have a subsidized healthcare plan. Another portion of the skinny peel was getting rid of the employer mandate for 8 years, which would make it so that employers don't have to provide health insurance for their employees, which is generally a good thing because we don't want to hamstring employers like that by forcing them to purchase insurance.
Similar to what you were saying before about there being a sort of new narrative evolving, something that I've started to see amongst my liberal peers is people calling for single payer healthcare in the United States, which people have been doing that for a long time. But now there's all this shenanigans about Obamacare, and there's all these, it seems like, at least in some cases, there's people who are acknowledging that Obamacare is not everything that liberals chalked it up to be. And so they're now saying like, oh, well, we need single payer healthcare. That's the solution. Everywhere else in Europe has single payer healthcare, and we don't hear them complaining about it at all.
Yeah. In some ways, I think, and don't crucify me for this, but I think single payer would be better than Obamacare, than the death spiral, because what we have is some Frankenstein creation. And I think...
But between healthcare industry cartels and healthcare insurance industry cartels.
Yeah. And I think that
single payer would be slightly less broken.
Oh, because in America, and I'm just pulling the statistic that I heard out of thin air, but the United States, I think, spends more per capita on healthcare than any other nation in the world.
That's something that you hear a lot.
Yeah.
Although
is that true?
I haven't researched it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was true or if it wasn't true, because they may be looking at how much does the individual spend on healthcare, and like, well, obviously that's going to be skewed if you have a society with a single payer healthcare system, because how much you're actually paying for healthcare is obfuscated by the government. So yeah, I haven't looked into that, but I kind of have a gut reaction to be suspicious.
And rightly so. Statistics, as we know, can be manipulated. But we all know that healthcare isn't working in this country.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have to belabor that point.
And this is, as you can guess from this being a libertarian show, we don't think that a single payer healthcare system is the correct answer. The correct answer is to free the market.
Yes, and I want to get a little bit more into the economics behind it. So essentially, one of the reasons why healthcare costs are so expensive in this country is obviously regulations. The fact that I know a lot of what doctors do in this country is fill out paperwork and stuff like that. And I know that the role of filling out paperwork has grown and grown immensely, and abiding by regulations in hospitals. And another reason why is because we use insurance in the wrong way to pay for health care.
Well, yeah, I think someone objectively looking at the healthcare system in the United States wouldn't use the term insurance to describe what we're purchasing, because we're not buying insurance most of the time. Most of the time what we're doing is we're buying, in a sense, access to the healthcare system. We're buying access to healthcare goods at a less insane rate than it normally is, because an insurance company does price negotiation with a hospital for you in order to. I'm getting ahead of myself, but hospitals charge, or they ask for outrageous amounts of money for their goods, and then insurance providers will agree to pay a significantly lower rate than what they're asking for. And then hospitals can claim that difference in pay as a loss in order to keep their nonprofit status. And then the customer, you need to have an insurance company to be able to do those negotiations of prices for you. And even in this case, the prices are really too high, but when you buy insurance, it's a lot more than just it's a lot more than just emergency medical care that you're purchasing. You're really purchasing an entrance into the medical system in this country, I would say.
Well, the problem that I was going to mention was that when you purchase insurance, it shields the consumer from the actual price of the services.
Oh, yeah, and there's that problem, too.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's been articles I've seen, none recently, but in the last year, even from people who aren't of a libertarian bent, but people are just trying to find how much a particular thing will cost beforehand, and it's impossible. There's no way for them to find that out. And since the prices of goods are obfuscated, there's no way for a consumer to discriminate based on price, which means that those prices are going to be higher.
So you have the insurance cartels, and you have a system of payment that is very twisted and warped from a free market. So you have those factors. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about why we have insurance and the way the insurance business operates.
Like what insurance actually is for.
Yes. So you have insurance for catastrophic situation. Essentially, you don't have insurance because you had the cold and you need to go in and get looked at briefly and then, get some Nasonex or something. You have insurance for when you get cancer or for when you get AIDS.
Or you have a broken arm.
I don't even, not even a broken arm, I don't think. Because I've looked at for-profit hospitals that do operate, and they have different options, but it's, you could, legitimately go in, and pay $100 to get your arm fixed if it's broken. Like, I don't think, that's not an emergency situation in my thinking. You know what I mean? I think that's part of basic care.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I'll find an episode to link it, because it was on the Tom Woods show. There was a for-profit cash-only doctor who was talking about his business model, and he said that X-rays, and I think it included blood work, X-rays, and CAT scans and MRIs in his cash plan, and it was really cheap, astoundingly cheap.
Yeah, I have heard of a hospital like that.
Yeah,
I think they're in Oklahoma.
Perhaps that'd be. I'd like to, if I knew about it. I'm covered under my parents' insurance.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Bloodsucker.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, but there's another story that's been in the news recently about the Charlie...
Related to single-payer health.
Related to single-payer healthcare that we wanted to talk to you about today. But first, let's hear a little bit about how we financially are able to bring the show to you.
If you are browsing the internet without the secure encrypted protection of NordVPN, your web traffic is completely vulnerable to third-party observation. NordVPN is the industry leader in secure and private VPN technology, offering military-grade encryption to keep your internet traffic secure. Take advantage of our special offer today and receive 72% off a 2-year subscription by following our link in the show notes page or by navigating to libertyweekly.net/Nord. That's libertyweekly.net/NORD.
So this Charlie Gad situation is the background of it is there was a child, because unfortunately he has died now, in the UK who was diagnosed with a terminal illness, which it sounds extremely rare. From the article that I read, it said that only 16 people in the world had been diagnosed at this point. And there wasn't anything that can be done in the UK, but there was now some US doctors who had some experimental care that they were, for a price, willing to offer to this family and their child. And this family crowdfunded the money. They did a GoFundMe, and they were able to raise enough funds to get treatment, to pay for the treatment for their child. But the UK hospital would not allow them to take their child out of the hospital and transport him to the United States. And so despite there being the means to potentially help this child, the hospital refused to let them take him, and they took it to court. And after so many months in court, it basically, in this time during this court hearing, Charlie got weaker, and this treatment would be more effective the sooner it happened. And eventually the parents gave up because too much time had been wasted. And unfortunately, I believe he either died yesterday or today.
I think we're recording this on Saturday. I think it was yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just an example of if you have a system, and I don't know if this is something that could possibly happen in the United States. I think it's by far less likely to. But when you have a system that the UK has a first payer universal healthcare system, and this is just an example of one of the horror stories that can possibly come from it, where you don't actually have control over your healthcare. It's in the hands of the government. And there are a lot of other stories that are related, there's a lot of other horror stories related to single payer healthcare. Something that we've mentioned before, but there's a man named Topher Field who was not denied, but put on a very long waiting list in order to get a tonsillectomy in Australia, which that's something that is a very easy and regular procedure that will happen very quickly in a country that doesn't have single payer healthcare. But because he was in the Australia, it was something that had to be delayed and take a very long time, which made his life significantly worse. So just something that people don't realize is that single payer healthcare is not, it has consequences for sure. And there's documented consequences to it.
Yeah, and I was going to try and bring an interview to the podcast with someone that I know who has relatives in Canada, and unfortunately her father just passed away, I think 3 weeks to a month ago, and he was in a Canadian hospital, and the horror stories that I heard, I really wanted to get them on the show, but it just didn't pan out, which is totally fine. But the things about like how they were changing his bed and they got feces on the curtain, which in this, he was sharing a room with like 4 other people, and shortages when it came to staff and equipment and rooms. And there were feces that were smeared on the curtain that was left for 2 days, and they were trying to get it cleaned up. It was either a day or 2 days, I can't remember exactly. Or they would keep them out in the hall for hours at a time, and just awful.
In a sense, kind of treated like cattle.
Yeah, like cattle. And the cost, I don't know if he had untreated diabetes, or I know he had gangrene in his foot, but the cost of putting him in a facility where he could get the care he needed was so high.
And this would be cost to the family to put him in a place
the cost to the family was so high. So it's just, I mean, terrible situation.
And just something that you hear very often about single payer systems is just the lack of supply. And I know particularly in the UK that doctors are not paid that much.
Yeah.
Which, as being an American is always very weird to hear, because here in America we have a shortage of doctors because of the outrageous licensing system that we have. But there they have the opposite problem for the same reasons, because of government meddling, that I'm sure that being a doctor is not something that's fun, something that's probably very stressful. There's a significant amount of pressure on you, and it's interacting with people who are in the UK. They very much treat the NHS, as it's called, as similar to they treat it similar to police care. It's definitely seen as a public service. It's something that you're making a sacrifice for to become a doctor, and it's obvious that there's not enough financial incentive to do it.
And in fact, this is a little tangential to what you just said, but I've heard that people will go to the emergency room for normal care, and it's become a standard thing where people come to the emergency room for their urgent care because there's no,
Oh yeah, unfortunately I listened to this interview a long time ago, and maybe I'll be able to find it, but we'll see. But I heard an interview with a doctor who said that there are regulars who come into the ER who he described as people who come in just to talk. Like, they don't actually even have issues because there's no recourse that the hospital can take against someone who is misusing their services. And so there's literally no reason for someone, there's no disincentive for someone to misuse the NHS besides public shaming. But that was something that I heard. It was an interview with someone who worked for the NHS. And I'm sure that there's probably not that many people who do that. But if you have a system that has no reason to disincentivize people, you will have individuals who flagrantly misuse a free product. So single payer healthcare is bad, and we definitely don't want it in the United States. And we definitely don't want Obamacare in the United States.
Yeah.
I personally don't have a lot of hope for where the healthcare is going in our country. So my best suggestion is that if it is at all possible, take care of yourself.
Yes.
And I'm gonna say this is advice that we don't follow ourselves, but we really should. But get enough sleep. Don't smoke. Eat healthy, because we want to stay out of the doctor's office, because it's a poor experience and you're not getting good service, and you're probably just gonna get worse service in the future.
Okay, Mom.
Yeah,
I feel like you're pointing this at me.
I regularly get 3 hours of sleep a night. I am no angel. I wish I slept more, but I just don't.
Man, I thought I was bad. You know, a lot of people probably too that listen to the podcast are night owls. And I think that's just the way that our generation is a bit.
Yeah, I work in the mornings. I work at 4 a.m. normally, and it's really rough for me naturally being a night owl.
Yeah.
But I manage.
Yeah.
I sleep a lot on my off days, and it's great.
Okay, so our next topic is the Russian sanction. And I guess I don't have too much to say about the Russian sanctions. Other than that, it's a really bad idea.
Economic sanctions are always a bad idea. Don't do it. You're directly targeting the populace of another country, especially when you have ones that deal with things like medicine and food. And it's, I think, a very shameful act for a country to prevent goods that can be used or primarily go to civilians, because it's a tactic of total war, I would say. And you are directly harming non-combatants.
Specifically, the measure, it's not actually so I misspoke. The sanctions are not just against Russia. They're also against Iran and North Korea, which is, the axis of evil now.
Mm-hmm.
And
if poor North Koreans, as if they needed more restrictions on what could get into their country.
Yeah. And I look at these numbers. It's 419 to 3 in the House was the vote. And I think there were only 2 senators that voted against it in the Senate. So
I forgot to mention another thing that's terrible about sanctions. They also hurt your own economy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Don't forget that.
So
you can't see this, but I'm just like shaking my head.
This is not going to end well. This is not good. I know the EU has talked about retaliation because they know they get a lot of their infrastructure like gas and stuff from Russia too. And so but these numbers are so overwhelming. It's very illustrative of how they're all on the same team. I mentioned that in the beginning of the podcast, how the left and right, there's no freaking difference. They have their show in the political theater, and we're supposed to watch it and be,
No, you're right. And it's really funny when the two parties are an example of them being on the same team. Is there are two parties debating about what the budget should be for the year, and they're debating over fractions of a percentage point.
Yeah.
When we're trillions of dollars in debt, and if anything, the real question should be, should we have the question should be about how drastic should we be cutting half of our budget, or should it be 3/4 of our budget, or whatnot? It shouldn't be over fractions of percentage point increases. It's just ridiculous to me.
So if you haven't yet disconnected yourself from politics, I would suggest doing it now. This is just illustrative of how it is all just a game that they play to keep us occupied.
Which, I mean, to be honest, we're falling for it right now. So we're not saying that it's going to be easy, but understand that it is a theater.
Yeah. Well, having that distinction in mind, but it also helps to at least be aware of what's happening, instead of getting caught up in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard that in retaliation, the Russians have kicked out or are kicking out all of the United States diplomats in the country, and they're closing and seizing all of their offices.
This is not going to end well.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. It just doesn't bode very well. And I hate to be super doom and gloom, but I think that our times demand a little bit of warning.
Yeah, I would say that be more wary of the future. Although personally, I'm someone who very firmly does not expect a World War III. I don't expect a nuclear war with Russia or China, because I'm not even, maybe I've mentioned this before, but throughout history, until the advent of nuclear weapons, war exclusively has been carried out by the poor for the benefit of the rich. And now with nuclear weapons, that means that the rich actually have to face consequences if there is a major war, if there is a war with a nuclear power. And I think it's kind of weird, but I legitimately think that nuclear weapons have done quite a bit to make the world safer. Like, I legitimately think that sans World War weapons, we would have had a World War III by now.
I think it's possible. I'm not as
I mean, I'm speculating. I don't know for
Yeah.
sure, but I think that's done quite a bit, to limit war within the country to war within the world to proxy wars instead of total wars between major, powers.
I don't know. I think it has been. I just think it's been relegated to certain areas. I'm not
Like, I think that I legitimately think that at least less destruction of capital overall happens because of in proxy wars related to total war.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a little more pessimistic when it comes to the outlook of war and peace. I think if there is a war, I think it will be maybe the biggest since Vietnam or since Korea. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it'll reach World War status.
And there's certainly, it could be another proxy war, another very large proxy war. That's true. That absolutely could happen. I wasn't even considering that.
Or it could be, if the elites really are stocking up on bunkers, as a bunch of, alarmists will say, oh, the elite are buying bunkers, they're prepping, mm-hmm. and at an alarming rate, and they're going to retreat to their nuclear silos while the world is devastated, and they'll emerge from the ashes transhumanly combined with machines.
I don't know. I would think most people would prefer to have a nice, luxurious life on golf courses and in the Caribbean than to that of being in a bunker. I think it's something that people would have as a, just in case, but I don't think they would choose bunker over power.
Yeah.
I don't think they would choose a bunker and power over golfing courses and coastal island and coastal views and tropical islands and less power.
I've heard they're really nice bunkers.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure I would love to live in one. But it would be fun having your entire world relegated to a bunker.
Well, there's also been this talk.
You couldn't use your luxury jet with plated gold leaf interior.
You couldn't take a ride to Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile island.
No,
on
you
the
couldn't.
Lolita Express. But I think there have been this study came out recently, and I'll link this in the show notes page, that male sperm count is going down 60 or has gone down 60% in the last 33 decades or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I could look into it now, but a lot of people in the doomsday community will be talking about how the eugenicists want to curb the human population, or at least the white population, mm-hmm. I've heard. And that I think, maybe large depopulation is part of the globalist future. I don't know.
I know we're very much speculating here, but I think that the actual reasons are debated, but universally across all developed countries, birth rates are decreasing, and it's not because of people not being able to have children. It's obviously because of people deciding that they don't want to have children, or their lifestyle doesn't fit having children. So I think that a scheme to reduce fertility of any population would...
I'm heavily skeptical, by the way, of this article.
I'm sure you're not saying that you believe it. You're just saying people have spoken of it.
Yeah.
I'm voicing my skepticism right now, and I'm thinking that if just industrialization has done much more to decrease populations than, I would say, than anything, than a clandestine effort to reduce male fertility.
Yeah, it's Monsanto and vaccinations. I kind of, my theory about it, and this isn't backed by anything but anecdotes, but it is that I think that as the human population reaches its carrying capacity, I think it levels off. Or as you're securing more of your material wants, there's less needs and wants. There's less risk that your offspring might die before maturity. Mm-hmm. So maybe in developing nations, you get larger populations because the possibility of...
How I would phrase it in economic terms would be that the more developed a country that you're in, the less incentives you have to birth many children. Because especially, one thing that probably makes a huge difference is that when you're not, most farming families will employ their children, and can't do that if you're a city slicker. You can't get income from your kids if you're salaried and working for another business.
Unless you make them work in the factory themselves.
But I mean, legally you can't.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, since most
you should be able to.
You should be. No, I agree. You should be able to. But we're in a society where it's, children are not able to earn wealth for their parents. And I'm not saying that they should. I would believe that a child should be earning wealth for themselves.
Yeah.
At whatever age they think that it's appropriate for them to start working.
I started at 11.
16? I don't recall. It was 16 or 15.
Our final topic that we wanted to discuss was the renewed prospect of a Calexit.
Our official stance on this is do it.
And that concludes the podcast for today.
Just kidding.
The specific details of the Calexit is that, so in April there was a secession movement that failed. Now a more moderate ballot measure has been approved. And so apparently the backers of this new moderate ballot have 180 days to attain 600,000 signatures in order to put it up to vote in the 2018 election.
Come on, Californians. Think about all of the military spending that you wouldn't have to pay for if you seceded from the Union.
Think of the single-payer healthcare that you could install in your new communist utopia.
Yeah, paid for by your Hollywood dollars. It would work out. Please do it. And then you can be a shining example of a progressive secession movement. So now people won't call secession movements racist anymore. And you can lead the way for the balkanization of the United States.
I'm just reading through this article that I'll link in the show notes page. But it's saying that the new measure that seeks to set up an advisory commission to inform California's governor on ways to increase independence from the federal government. It would reportedly cost $1.25 million per year to fund this advisory commission. So you're off to a good start, California.
How many people are in this board? How much are they getting paid each?
I don't know.
What?
And that's just on the over the table money.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's what they say it's going to cost right now.
Yeah.
But we can't possibly fathom how much this program will require, how much this board will require in funds in the future for them to really do their job.
But they're spinning it as that the initiative wouldn't result in California exiting the country. It would result in California being a, quote, fully functioning sovereign and autonomous nation within the U.S. Well, what's the point?
This sounds, oh man,
this just sounds really stupid.
I'm hearing this and I'm getting excited because I recently listened to a bunch of talks from Tom Woods about U.S. history, and in them they talked about the secession movement and the principles of
98. We did an episode. Yeah. I did an episode on it. This was my solo episode that I specialized.
Which I did listen to, by the way.
Oh, okay. Did you glean more from my episode or from Tom Woods? You don't have to answer that.
Well, it was about 13 hours of content from Tom Woods, so that's my defense.
And he went to Harvard.
But it's really exciting for me to hear this because there's all these concepts that have laid fallow in U.S. politics, like states being individually sovereign, or states being independent and equal members of a union. And it's really bizarre to have an initiative seemingly from the left being for federalism.
Yeah, they don't even know how to federalize correctly. They don't know how to. What is this? You're going to be a fully functioning sovereign and autonomous nation within the United States? Well, then you're a state then. So
you're the older concept.
The original concept.
You're the original concept of a state.
And in fact, I never understood how our friends on the left could conceive of the fact that states are not above the federal government, or that they're not independent political entities, or they weren't ordained to be in the beginning, at least, because the very term state, why else would we call our states states? The term state means, we use the term the state to describe government. Well, then wouldn't you,
why wouldn't
logic,
you would use a different word if you're going to describe something that we're not 13 separate governments.
Yeah.
I think the reason why people believe that is it's fundamentally people are attached to the status quo. And I think so, at least.
I think it's government schooling.
Possible. That's a part of it. But I think there's also, for sure, that's a part of it. Don't, if you can, listeners, don't send your kids to government schools.
And we're going to talk about that in our upcoming ebook, too.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that.
Mm-hmm. But I think that there's also a really strong, just psychological reason for people to be interested in the status quo, because I actually got into a political debate yesterday, which was a lot of fun, and I think was actually constructive in the end. And one of the things that I thought of while I was in the midst of the argument was that I even though I didn't really mention it, but it's very easy to have a belief that implies that the system is not completely and fundamentally at its core a mess and incorrupt. It's very hard to sell to someone who's not interested in politics, who's not interested in activism in any kind of way, and doesn't really want this to be a part of their life. It's really hard for you to casually make them realize that how basically the entire world is organized is fundamentally corrupt and immoral. And I think that most people, just because they don't want to have to deal with that problem and that issue, that they are not interested in accepting ideas of voluntarism.
It's better to be ignorant. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, absolutely. I legitimately think that in this case, ignorance is bliss.
And then the burden of realizing these things about, the way the world fundamentally works, is why it's a big theme within the podcast is, my own struggle with discovering these things. As we talked before about the 3 levels that you go through as a voluntarist, or at least in my journey, was the first one was realizing the libertarianism.
Yeah.
The second is going full voluntarist ANCAP. Or sorry, the first one is minarchy. Mm-hmm. The second one is ANCAP. And the third is the kakistocracy, and realizing that we're being ruled by the worst in society.
Yeah, I would say I skipped step 1, but I definitely had the 2 and 3 where I was, anarchy is the only moral way to form a society. And then I was like, oh, wow. Especially when I started getting into the Corbett report, was just like, oh, geez, it's really bad. Things are really bad. I didn't realize how bad things really are.
It's real depressing. And you can't go back after you make this realization. There's no return. It is depressing. I think when I first started watching the Corbett report and I started really getting into the depths of the evils, and it was like a fugue, like a weight on my shoulders that, did you have this experience? Maybe you're more like a duck where you can let it roll off your back.
I would say I'm quite a bit like a duck.
Yeah.
In most punches life throws at me, I'm able to roll off pretty well, emotionally at least.
Yeah.
So my response was honestly bemusement. Where I was kind of more like, damn, wow.
Yeah.
Like, people are really getting away with this. That was kind of my response usually. And then later I would have moments where I was like, oh, wow. That's like, I would suddenly feel the gravity occasionally, but most of the time I'm almost fascinated. Maybe that means I'm a sociopath.
No. I guess I don't want to say that I was overburdened to the point of being suicidal or depressed, like heavily depressed or anything, but it's definitely kind of a fugue. Mm-hmm. So we got a bit off topic here towards the end, but that's okay. I think that a lot of people in the audience have had this similar experience. But realizing the kakistocracy and the level of corruption and the way that society inherently works in this state, the way that politics and government inherently works, I think that the elites have more of a handle on the situation than we would believe. That there's even though we believe in the rings within rings and the interlocking spheres of connected influences, and that they're all driven by one overarching or by mutual interest, that they're all driven by mutual interest. Despite that, I think that they do have a plan, and this they have somewhat of a plan, a general sense of what direction they're pushing things in, and this kind of ties into the prospects of a global war or something. What do you think? You were shaking your head a little bit.
I don't necessarily agree. Although, this is all speculative. We don't know for sure. I'm very much more of the opinion that it is although for sure that there are groups that conspire together, obvious examples, Bilderberg, but there definitely are people who conspire together and who have plans for what they want to see the world become. But I think what really binds everyone together is mutual self-interest, and that it's less about people looking 100 years in the future and thinking like, oh yes, we are going to engineer single motherhood within the United States through the use of welfare. I don't think that sort of thing is. I don't think people are thinking that. I don't think they're thinking we'll create a class perpetually sucking off the state's teat through welfare. I think what they're thinking is, we'll make this because it will give me power in the moment, and then I don't care what the consequences are, and they happen to be bad, as you would expect.
I don't know. I think that there's a bunch of long-running scams that they know what the scam is, and they can get in on it. And I think, if we look at every single industry that's been, starting with the Fed is the biggest one, they have been cartelized off. And I think that they know the game. They've been playing the game. The game is developed in the past 2 centuries. To the state we are at this point. And I think they know the game, they know how to make money, they know how to manipulate the game, and they know how to hide the game. And I think that these long-running scams, maybe that's the root of what it is that they have everything that they want. What do you do when you have all the money you want in the world? You want power.
I don't think that the majority of the worldwide community of a worldwide community of elites would gain power from a World War III.
Oh no, sorry, that's not what I'm trying to.
Okay, that's what I thought you were saying.
What I mean is in the plan, the new world order, whatever term you want to use, that there's some kind of orchestrated movement. Maybe it's not like a precision step 1, one world government, step 2 enslavement, step 3 profit. I don't think it's that detailed. I think it's more the mutual pushing is in a certain direction, and I think it is leading towards changing the world reserve currency and more institutional control and stuff like that.
I think you're reneging on what you said before, because I agree with that, but I think what you described to me sounds like people acting in self-interest towards.
Well, what was my earlier proposition then?
That there is a plan, and that it's what I heard was that there are goals, and that there's something that the majority of people know that they're marching towards, and want that, and that didn't sound like what you described.
Well, I think it's a mixture of the two. It's not like, oh, everyone gets together, or even the different spheres of influence get together and be like, okay, we need to make X, Y, and Z happen. And then I think it is orchestrated in a general direction with maybe certain ascertainable goals, but there's no detailed step plan to get there. But it's a little more organized than just some people acting within their mutual self-interest.
Mm-hmm. I guess certainly, but now it sounds like there's only a small difference between what we're suggesting. So it could be.
I think that you and I, on the majority of things, we agree almost 100%, except we get into the semantics of it, and either I'm not good at voicing my viewpoint, or vice versa, and then
it sounds to me like we're pretty much in agreement, although we may use different terms.
Yeah. Well, so in this episode, we decided to tackle the political theater and talk about current events. First, we talked about Obamacare and the Charlie Gard situation. Then we stopped on Russian sanctions and talked a little bit about that. Then we were talking about Calexit, and then we circled back to the Russian sanctions, and then talked about the New World Order, in quotes, and their plan regarding World War III, or the prospect of financial collapse in World War III, or some kind of Armageddon. The world of conspiracy is something that we haven't touched on in a few episodes, but
It's back in full force.
it's back in full force. So
And we hope you enjoyed the ride.
we hope you enjoyed the ride. Definitely check out the Corbett report,
It'll
This
give
is-
context.
because it'll give some context to what we were talking about here. And so as we're wrapping up here, be sure to sign up for our email list, where you will get free copies of our ebook, including our upcoming ebook that we are just in the development stages of producing right now. But we're really excited about it. And so make sure you get on that email list and secure your copy before anyone else. Next, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us on any platform that you're listening to these sounds here today. It really does help us out. We've gotten a few reviews, I think at least one so far on iTunes, and we are very grateful for the kind words, as we mentioned in the last episode. And so that really helps us out, and keep the reviews coming.
And don't forget to use SpeakPipe. We're really excited to answer your questions.
Yeah, and we really want to integrate it into the show. So we get an MP3, we can put your voice directly in the show. It'll be great. I'm actually really stoked for it.
Me too.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope that you'll join us next time.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, Pat McFarland here. As a listener of the Liberty Weekly podcast, you have probably heard of our feature program Thought Crime Thursdays. If you enjoy perusing the world of dystopian fiction, you will love the course Sci-Fi, Liberty, and Dystopia. Taught by Professor Brad Berzer, a frequent guest on The Tom Woods Show, Sci-Fi, Liberty, and Dystopia is one of the most popular courses available exclusively through Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Correspondingly, it is also where I have been drawing inspiration for future installments of Thought Crime Thursdays. To gain access to this course and 18 others taught by top libertarian professors, join through our affiliate link by navigating to libertyweekly.net/Liberty Classroom, or follow the link in the show notes page.